Welcome to Splice and Splatter, the film podcast presented by the Cocteau Cinema, where classic horror
meets modern gore.
We're your hosts, Siena
and Al.
And Al, what are we talking about today?
Today we're talking about I almost forgot. We're talking about...
What are we talking about?
Why are we here?
What day is
here?
this? Who gave us microphones?
That's a great question.
A really
the answer is us. We did this to
that
ourselves.
Is actually the answer. Yeah. So we only have ourselves to blame.
We do.
We're talking about Scream and The Exorcist, partially because we're playing both of those at the Cocteau this coming week from when we're recording the podcast. It's
Halloween.
Halloween. Yeah, I think Exorcist is that Friday through Sunday, so the 27th through the 29th.
Mm-hmm.
And Scream is on Halloween. Yeah. Before we get into that, though, I've been again collecting horror film tidbits.
Ooh, go for it.
And I wanted to
run
one by you to get your reaction. I don't know if you listened to Karina Longworth's podcast. You must remember this.
No.
But she's doing a series on erotic 90s movies, and she's talking about Eyes Wide Shut. Did you know Stanley Kubrick originally wanted to cast Steve Martin as the lead in Eyes Wide Shut?
I just saw someone on TikTok mock up a poster. And I was like, what? And I scrolled by it really fast. I was like, what's going on?
What is this?
But
Who
that's
thought
why.
of this? Yeah. I honestly think it would be incredible.
Oh, that's funny.
Again, this goes back to my Jim Carrey needs to make more horror movies thing. I think that...
Not Ashton Kutcher.
Not Ashton Kutcher. But we need more of that combination of actors who are known for comedy and horror material. I feel like there's
the blend.
Something really...
It's so
really
funny.
Good there. What's your take on it? Can you see Steve Martin in Eyes Wide Shut?
I haven't seen Eyes Wide Shut in a really long time.
Okay.
Film
I thought
school.
You were going to say you hadn't seen
film
it.
School. So I almost feel like I can't speak to this.
That's
but
fair.
I love Steve Martin because we've both been watching Murders in the Building. Only Murders in the Building.
So
on
good.
Hulu?
On Hulu, yes.
Yeah, which I finished, which I won't say anything about, but my God.
The White Room. I can't get over the White Room.
Yeah, Steve Martin, I feel like he's also just entered a stage in his career that he truly doesn't give a flying fuck about anything.
Zero.
Yeah, he was having the best time there. So yeah, I don't know. It'd be incredible. Are you talking Steve Martin back then or Steve Martin?
That's I could see either, honestly.
That's funny.
The only question to me is then who do you cast as the Nicole Kidman character? Because obviously she got cast partially because she and Tom Cruise were actually married at the time.
Right.
I don't know if Steve Martin's married or who he's married to, who he was married to back then, but I'm obsessed with this idea now.
It's so funny.
I really want to see it.
Someone needs to do one of those edits where they edit Eyes Wide Shut with Steve Martin clips. Internet, get on it.
Yeah, the only good use of AI.
Oh my God, yeah.
Imagine. Somebody make this for us, please.
Have you been watching anything kind of else lately?
My God. Well,
before we get into it?
We're recording this week. It's the same week as the Santa Fe International Film Festival.
Yeah.
I moderate many panels for that, so I've been watching things for that. I haven't watched any horror so far, so I'm hoping. I'm still watching some of the shorts from the New Mexico Shorts section, and I'm hoping that I'll get some horror in there.
Yeah.
But I do want to give a shout out to this one New Mexico short called Fry Bread Jesus, which is
amazing title.
So funny. I was hooting with laughter. It's so good. So good.
Amazing.
Yeah. What have you been watching? Have you seen anything new? Anything fun? Anything scary?
Yeah, lots of mixes of stuff. Disney Plus just released the new Goosebumps series. The first half of it. So that has Justin Long in it.
I love Justin Long.
Who, his character, no spoilers, but he kind of has these very physical attributes that he's playing this character in a way. And just his body comedy in this is so funny, and it's giving nods to the original, which it's not the original. It's obviously you can't really get that nostalgia again, but it's super fun. It's really nostalgic feeling and cozy. So waiting for the second half of that. And then just been ticking through lists of new horrors. So watched this really great film called The Lodge with Riley Keough.
Oh, I
Oh my
love Riley
god.
Keough. Oh
Yeah,
my
if you
god.
haven't seen The
No,
Lodge,
I
when
haven't.
did it come out? It came out not I feel like it's a fairly recent
I mean, if it's Riley
film.
Keough, it's probably pretty
Oh yeah, fair,
recent-ish,
good
right?
point.
Yeah.
Oof, that was a journey.
Ooh. Ooh.
There's a lot of mystery elements to it. It's yeah, you kind of like almost don't even know what's going on. Kind of like when we were talking about
Mhm.
Candyman, like, do you trust the narrator?
Right.
It's like
Right.
you don't know if you trust the narrator in
Oh,
this.
I love
So
that. Love that in
yeah,
a horror movie.
2019.
Oh,
Thank
thank you,
you.
Travis.
So yeah, it came out in 2019, The Lodge. That was like the most recent, and then kind of watched
Ooh.
Cobwebs.
Ooh.
That was amazing. The kid in that needs he needs to be the kid in everything. He's spooky. He's a
Speaking
spooky
of
kid.
good child actors, feels like a good transition in maybe.
Into
Do you
The
want to do The Exorcist
Exorcist?
first or do you want to do Scream
No, you
first?
go first. I
Should I
went
go
first last
first?
time.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's fair.
Yeah.
All right.
Speaking of spooky
Speaking of spooky
spooky
kids,
kids.
right? Which God, Linda Blair, I mean, it's just one of those characters where like I'm sure she couldn't have known at the time that this would be like the thing that would define her entire adult
Mhm.
life. But I also can't imagine like could you really say that you would make a different choice in those shoes knowing that this is both going to box you in but also going to
Right.
kind of make you part of this like absolutely genre defining moment in
Mhm.
cinema. So we're talking about The Exorcist. It was released in 1973, directed by Billy Friedkin, written by William Peter Blatty, who also wrote the 1971 book that the film was based on. It stars Ellen Burstyn, who was also in things like The Last Picture Show, Requiem for a Dream, Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. Max von Sydow, who I'm obsessed with. He's kind of most famous for working in almost every Ingmar Bergman film ever. He's the knight from The Seventh Seal. He was also in the OG Dune, Star Wars: The Force
Funny.
Awakens. He was also the Three-Eyed Raven in Game of Thrones. So
Oh,
little shout out
funny.
there. Jason Miller, who I think this was his first film role. He was a stage actor, and Linda Blair, who we love, who I also found out in the research for this has a little uncredited role as a reporter in Scream. So there's a little connective tissue there.
And I think they're watching The Exorcist in a scene
They
of
are.
Scream.
I mean,
So
The
this
Exorcist
really
came
worked
on
out.
TV and it reminded me of you. So for those who haven't seen The Exorcist, what are you doing? But I'll
Turn on the
turn
TV
on the
now.
TV.
Start
I'm sure
streaming.
it's playing somewhere if you still have TV/cable.
Mhm.
12-year-old Reagan isn't acting like herself. And after kind of doctor after doctor and psychiatrist after psychiatrist is unable to pinpoint the source of the problem, her mother turns to a local priest for help with an exorcism. It's allegedly based on the 1949 exorcism of a real 13-year-old boy named Robbie. It's kind of a
Mm.
very upsetting story. And obviously it's on folks' minds a lot at the moment because The Exorcist Believer is in theaters right
Yep.
now, 50 years later, which is a direct
Oh my
sequel to
god,
the original
50.
Exorcist.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very curious whether they had timed that intentionally or not, because with the pandemic, it's like timing for film releases has been so odd
Right.
that could well have just been a
Happy
lucky
accident.
coincidence. Yeah. It was apparently one of the first films to use a four-wall distribution method, which I thought was interesting because that's how I was planning to release my film before COVID hit.
Can you explain what a four wall? Yeah.
I've got you. Four-walling basically means that the film producer slash distributor rents the theater out from the theater owner, and then they take all of the ticket sales. So there's kind of no risk on the theater owner.
Right.
If there's any profit, it goes directly to you. If there's no profit, the loss is on you. So it's a method that like indie films like to use a lot because it's kind of you can do it on sort of a more case by case basis.
Mhm.
But it's interesting that it started with this like extremely famous studio horror film. It's also officially the second highest grossing Warner Bros. Film of all time. Can you guess what the first highest is?
Warner Bros.
Yeah. Take a
No.
wild guess.
I don't even know if I have one. I'm going to say something from a different studio on accident.
It's Barbie.
Oh.
It's Barbie.
Oh.
Isn't that funny? Up
Go
until
Greta.
this summer, The Exorcist was the highest grossing Warner Brothers film, and then
Whoa.
Barbie surpassed it.
I mean, both about existential dread a little bit.
There you go. Yeah, it's that
I guess maybe not
invasive
existential.
thoughts of death
Yeah,
Barbie.
invasive thoughts of death. Oh.
It was also the first horror movie to be nominated for Best Picture, which was super controversial at the time.
Oh, yeah, I
And
bet.
yeah, the director George Cukor actually threatened to leave the Academy if it won Best Picture, which it didn't.
Don't be
so
butthurt.
I know.
Don't be
I'm so
butthurt.
fascinated by that. Like, what are you trying to protest?
I think just horror in general, people, winning
People-
awards, they like to
Yeah.
push it down. So
it's like considered such a low genre, which like why?
wrong.
Wrong. I'm sorry, but we watch films to feel good. And if you're the sort of person that horror makes you feel good, like it's just as worthy as any other genre. Rant for a different time. But also apparently at the time that it was released, Warner Brothers was kind of nervous about the title because they were worried that people wouldn't know what an exorcist was. Which is fascinating, right?
Again, because I feel like how we live now is like how many movies have been made. We're very familiar with this.
And because of this movie particularly was kind of what brought the concept of exorcism back to kind of the public eye. But at the time it was like this thing that people really didn't know about, which I hadn't realized that, but knowing that while I was rewatching this time, it's like, oh, that's why we get that weirdly long exposition scene of the priest describing what an exorcism is. Because they genuinely thought
the people
wouldn't know, which is so funny. So just fascinated by that. I have several little behind the scenes tidbits for you. One, that kind of famous scene where Reagan's head turns all the way around.
Oh my gosh, so good.
It's so good. I used to live in New York near the Museum of the Moving Image there, and they actually have the life-size animatronic doll of Reagan that they used for that scene.
Oh, cool.
And it's just kind of sitting in a glass case with its head constantly spinning slowly around.
No.
And I just remember standing in front of it and spending like what felt like hours just watching Reagan go around and around.
You're like, this is my calming place.
Yeah, I was like, this is where I go to feel soothed.
Oh, poor girl. Her work never stops.
I know. I am very curious about how, like, is somebody changing the batteries in Reagan? Is she plugged in? How are they keeping her
She's
going?
possessed.
The movie's coming to life. Yeah. Apparently, Friedkin fired a gun near Jason Miller, the actor who played Father Karras's head, before a take to get a startled reaction for him.
Whoa.
Yeah, and Jason Miller was like, "What the hell, dude? I'm an actor."
Yeah, he's like, I'm good.
This
Like,
is my job. Yeah.
Like, I know how to do this professionally without your help.
Yeah, please don't do
Whoa.
that. So, yeah, it's really...
So no laws for that on set, huh? Did he get... And I mean...
Didn't get in any trouble. I mean, he's William Friedkin. We don't question these things, apparently.
Sure.
So, terrifying. There's also kind of different versions of the film. There's an original director's cut that ends with Kinderman, the policeman, and Dyer kind of having a bonding moment at the end. There's also kind of an extended version that has scenes that Friedkin originally cut, which led to him and Blatty having like a huge falling out for several decades. And then later on kind of reconciling and sort of agreeing that those scenes should have been in the movie.
Funny.
I've never been able to find a version with those scenes restored, so I can't tell you as much as I would like to about what that looks like.
Yeah.
But,
I was gonna say I watched last night the theatrical release and then found out because I don't think I've ever seen the other version with the scene. So
I mean, it seems like it's
the better one.
That's the sense I get. I would imagine that it's the sort of thing that you can probably find more easily in other countries. I think it's probably harder to get a hold of it in America. Yeah, I know. Whole bunch of really surprising actors who were up for parts in this. Apparently, Audrey Hepburn was the top choice for Chris, the mom.
Really?
Isn't that amazing? I
don't know if I could see her conveying such horror.
Yeah, which
also
is
swearing that much.
That's the thing to me, because I know that I love Audrey Hepburn in Wait Until Dark, which is an amazing horror movie she's in from the 60s.
Okay.
Where she plays a blind woman. But I cannot picture her having the sort of I guess like sense of fortitude that Chris as a character has. Like she just feels so delicate as a person in a way that I am not sure would suit it. Friedkin was also trying to get Carrie Fisher and Debbie Reynolds, since they were actual mother-daughter, which I
I could see that,
know.
though.
I could see that very easily. Jack Nicholson was also up for Karis, but Friedkin auditioned him and was like, too unholy to play a priest.
Yeah.
Which, yeah.
Love me some Jack Nicholson
Not
films,
for
but like,
this.
yeah, you
Not
would have
for-
been like,
not for
he
Father
should be.
Karras. Yeah.
Is he possessed?
Yeah. Oh, also about that head turning scene, do you want to know what the sound is that they used for the Foley there?
Yes, absolutely.
It's so first of all, the sound artist who did all of the sound effects for this came from the Jodorowsky film El Topo, which is another one I would love to talk about if you've seen that. The sound of Reagan's head turning is him taking this very old, kind of cracked leather wallet that he had and twisting it in front of a mic. Isn't that gross?
Yeah, that is, because it's a very visceral sound, even like you describing it, just the kind of creakiness of it.
Yeah.
Yucky.
So disgusting. Also, I'm sure that you have heard about this before. There was a murderer on set. I'm trying to find in my notes here what his name is, but it's one of the actors in the cerebral angiography scene was an actual medical tech who was also
he was a medical tech?
Actual medical tech, which is why he was cast in that scene. He doesn't have any lines. He's kind of a background actor, performing what he did in his daily life. And then in the evenings, he would go out and kind of like seduce and murder gay men, which is actually what inspired Friedkin to make the movie Cruising, was finding out after the fact that this was happening on his set.
Ooh.
I know. So like, obviously the Exorcist set famously haunted. There were so many deaths associated with it. There were so many accidents, but a murderer, and particularly
murder.
I know, and a murder that inspired what I think is one of his other like best films. Because Cruising is amazing.
Spooky.
So fascinating, right? This movie is a wild ride in so many different ways. And this was my first time revisiting it in a very long time. I didn't find it as scary on this rewatch. I'm curious what your reaction was.
Well, so popular opinion. I don't know.
Ooh.
Well, to set the stage of me as a human being, I didn't grow up with any sort of religion in my household. It was very much anything I learned about religion was what I learned through friends that were, and I grew up in a suburb of Detroit. And so I feel like just my whole life, religion's been one of those things that is so peripheral in my life.
Relate.
Yeah. So it's just like, I think on that context, watching any sort of film about exorcism in any way, and because obviously you can't have the exorcism without the religious elements.
Exorcism,
So they're besties.
That is pretty important.
So I think just that as a whole I just don't feel anything when I watch those. So I think Exorcist movies aren't very terrifying to me. So yeah, and I think as I get older, obviously, this was a nice rewatch for me because every few years when I haven't seen something, if I don't like a film particularly, or it like doesn't land with me, I should say, in the way that I would hope it would, or I know it means to so many other people, I always find it interesting rewatching it again and seeing like if things have changed, because I do have some films where that's happened. This one I was still like, it doesn't scare me in that sense, but I mean, Reagan, though, she kind of, again, like, if I'm left alone in a room and just hear a noise, I'm like, it's like, she's not going to come get me. She's not here. But yeah, so it's not scary to me in that sense. I kind of watch The Exorcist as a understanding of that meant something in the history of horror.
Very much,
genre.
Yeah,
so I think that's kind of how I watch it.
I think that the first time I watched it, I was quite scared because I was around Reagan's age, probably. I was like 12 or 13.
Okay. Yeah.
And so on that level, it like hits you viscerally differently when you can kind of like pinpoint yourself in one of the characters that way.
You're like, I'm a kid, I could get possessed one. And I have a Ouija board that's sitting in my living room right now that looks exactly like that one on that table.
Allie,
so
you should bring it in and we should play.
Absolutely not. I'm sorry. Did we not just watch the movie?
Yes, that's the point.
I'm good because it's old and I don't know where it came from necessarily.
Ooh.
Probably from the 90s,
Oh,
but
I'm
I
so
don't play around with
intrigued. I've actually never played with a Ouija board,
I moved the
so
planchette. I don't keep the planchette on the
oh,
board. I
that feels
keep them
smart. That
separate
feels very
so
smart.
nothing invites itself.
um, but kind of what I was most struck by on this rewatch, my first note under my like observations
Yeah.
section here is just in all caps medical horror. Because
Oh.
to me, those were the scenes that were still like viscerally terrifying and actually sort of
Yes.
more so on a rewatch.
Yes.
And it was interesting because as I was reading about the history of the film, obviously one of kind of the major controversies around it was that this is one of those horror movies that ambulances had to be called to the theater because people were fainting and throwing up.
Yeah.
And it was mainly at the cerebral angiography scene, which is fascinating to me,
That's
both
funny.
because it's the scene that scares me the most. Like I'm much more scared of that scene than I am of, you know, Reagan like crawling down the stairs or like throwing up pea soup. But it's also that's the scene that the real murderer's in. And so
Oh, so there's this air of something that you're
there's
picking
this like
up.
yeah, and I'm curious if you had that kind of a feeling
Is that the
too.
scene with the needles and
Yes, that's the scene with the needles.
You know what? I
That's
had to close my eyes.
Yeah, that's the scariest scene in the movie,
I
right?
can't. Yeah, medical stuff like that again.
Mhm.
It must get a lot of people because
I'm
yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, it
Yeah.
had to close my eyes.
Yeah, well, and it's
Not gonna
interesting
lie.
because like, that made me see the whole movie as much more about the horror of the medical system
Mm.
than about the, kind of the religious aspect, which obviously is, like, a lot of the textual horror that's
Yeah.
going on. But rewatching it, I felt like I was picking up more on the fact that the script is constantly kind of leaving the door open to the idea that there's not actually a demon, that it
Oh.
is and I'm wondering if you felt this as well, but just with things like Reagan reacting to what she thinks is holy water that turns out to just be tap water.
Yeah.
Like there's little things in that the director is putting in that kind of, for the skeptic, leave the door open to an interpretation of the movie in which it is something else, in which it
Oh.
is like something psychiatric or something medical.
Yeah.
And I was really interested in that because, like, with that being the part that feels scariest to me, um, it it felt almost like an entirely different movie watching it through that lens.
Oh.
So
Is that how you watched it this time then
yeah,
around?
yeah. Which I wasn't like
Interesting.
going in being like, what if I view this as like a medical horror
Yeah.
movie? But like that was like
You're
what
like,
I
no, this horrified me.
yeah, that's what I and especially because you know, we get the medical horror at about like the 50-minute mark. We don't get any of the like really kind of like visceral graphic possession stuff until like about an hour and a half in. So
Oh, wow.
we
Didn't
that's
even
like
realize that.
very late in the movie.
Mhm.
Much more of it is devoted to kind of the horror of this mom working her way through the medical system. And I was just thinking about like he's devoting so much more screen time to this than he actually is to the Catholic Church.
I didn't even think about it in that way because again, just it's the horrors of the mom, and you just
Right.
feel for her so
Right.
much. That was actually one of the things I kept saying during this rewatch was just
Mhm.
like, I can't imagine being a parent and
Yes.
just like desperately trying to
Mhm.
grasp this idea
I
that something's happening with your
Yeah.
child.
Yeah.
And either like you're like, it's not normal.
Right. Right.
And does she say it's like, oh, it's not normal, it's
Right.
supernatural? She doesn't
Right.
say anything, but she's like, something's happening
Something's happening.
that I can't explain. And
Mhm.
I'm like reaching for help and like the horror of
Mhm.
that. So I guess
Yeah.
it does in that way. I think without even knowing it, I was kind
Right.
of put myself in that place of like a
Mhm.
mom navigating
Yeah.
this medical
Right?
arena and trying to figure out like what's wrong with my child.
Ugh. Ugh.
Yeah.
Which also, I'm wondering if you had a similar reaction watching it back as an adult instead of as somebody
Mhm.
Reagan's age. I was just like, oh my God. Like how would you as a mom in this situation not and obviously from a modern day perspective, but like when Reagan comes out into the party and was like, "You're all
I
gonna die up there," and
know.
then she pees herself. I was
Yeah.
just like, this kid has like clearly experienced a trauma.
Yeah.
Like it reads to me as an adult, like this kid,
She's
like
going through something.
something bad has happened to this kid, and like doesn't necessarily need to be taken to a psychiatrist, but, like, I don't know, maybe call Child Protective Services or
Yeah.
something, like, something
Yeah,
bad
everyone
has
just stared at
happened.
her, and I was like,
Yeah.
"Cover her
I
up. Get her out of
know!
there."
Like, you're embarrassing her,
Yeah.
it's cruel. Ugh, that scene hits me very much the same way that the prom scene in Carrie does, that kind of,
Mhm.
like, horror
Oh,
via, like, excruciating
yeah,
embarrassment
yeah.
that's just
Like,
ugh.
true vulnerability.
Mhm,
Mhm.
mhm, and especially true vulnerability connected to, like, childhood and adolescence like
Mhm.
that, just, oh, does that hit hard. What did you think of the, like, meta element of the Ellen Burstyn character being an actress? I feel like it's pretty comparatively rare in horror compared to other genres to see that kind of, like, a film
Mhm.
within a film just
Yeah.
because I guess in horror, my assumption is that that's, something that people are less likely to dive into because they don't want to, risk puncturing your suspension of disbelief.
Mhm.
But it not only didn't do that for me, it kinda added on to it in some interesting ways, and I'm curious what
It's
your
funny
take
that you bring that
was.
up because actually when I start to talk about
Mhm.
Scream, that's obviously an
Mhm.
element that's in Scream that
Oh, yeah. They're
they
both
yeah,
so
they built it
meta.
around.
Yeah.
Um, did it so I guess it wasn't really an element that bothered me because in the sense it was such an aside
Mhm.
as her character. Obviously, there's that
Mhm.
moment that she has where, what's his name asks for, like, the autograph for his
Oh,
daughter, but
yeah.
he's like,
Yeah,
"No, it's
yeah.
just for
Kinderman.
me."
Mhm.
But just the idea of, just that moment too when she signs it, she's, like, super happy, and he's
Mhm.
like, "You're such a nice lady," and he's
Mhm.
like, she's like, "You're such a nice man," and then they
Mhm.
walk out, and then she just has that breakdown, and it's just, like, the facade
Yeah.
that she had to
Just
put
crumbles.
on
Yeah.
the whole time too, so it adds a layer of for me, what it added, was not so much the meta-ness, but just the
Mhm.
idea of that she had this whole other layer of she had to uphold herself and her home and her status in order to protect,
Mhm.
her child too on top of it. So it just added to the horror element for me because it's just nowadays, like, thinking about an actor, if they have this
Yeah.
going on, they're made into a circus and it's this whole
Mhm.
thing, so again, it's just the horror of, like, a mom by
Mhm.
herself, with this identity outside that people know her as a
Mhm.
famous actress and having to hold it in.
Yeah, yeah.
So, that's how I took it, but
I think part of what I loved about it on this rewatch, because something I love about a good horror movie is oftentimes when you go back and watch it after the first
Mhm.
time, when you're not paying as much attention to kind of the horror elements and you
Mm.
have more time to look at the other stuff that's going
Yeah.
on. I feel like so often little bits of comedy emerge that you wouldn't have noticed the first time around because you're too
Yeah. Oh,
scared.
like what?
Yeah. Oh my God. It's okay. First of all, I think it's hilarious that the movie she's in is called Crash Course. Like it's so obviously like kind of a joke about what's going on in the movie The Exorcist itself, but it also just sounds like it's going to be a terrible
Like a
film.
B-movie.
Yeah, like it sounds awful. But also the fact that Kinderman, the detective, when he's talking to Chris, is like inviting her to go to the movies and is like, "We should go see Othello starring Groucho Marx." Like, I need to pause for a
You're like,
second
"What?"
and I had to Google this just to make sure that this wasn't an actual movie. It's not.
Okay.
This is
I
a
was gonna say, is it?
no, it is a movie made up for The Exorcist of Othello starring Groucho Marx, and apparently there were, like, all of these Groucho Marx in-jokes on set because the screenwriter was friends with Groucho, and
Oh.
so, this is so hilarious to me. Apparently, William Friedkin actually, had planned to shoot a joke scene just for the sake of the cast's enjoyment,
Oh,
where
cute.
Groucho Marx would come on and play Father
No.
Karras in a scene,
No. Oh my
and
god,
he
that would've
got
been so
sick
cute.
last minute and wasn't able
No,
to.
we were deprived of
I
that
know! We were
video.
deprived of Groucho Marx,
That
The
would've been so
Exorcist.
cute.
Oh, isn't that amazing?
That's so cool. What a funny oh, man, bummer. We
Right?
didn't
I'm
get that.
so
How dare you
disappointed.
get
Yeah,
sick.
I know, I know.
That's so funny.
I'm curious, for me, in addition to the medical horror, the other
Mhm.
scene that has remained scary for me no matter how many times I watch this is actually the opening, which for whatever reason, even when I was like 12 or 13 and watching it for the first time, that was the scene that really frightened me. And the imagery
Really?
that stuck in my head was the opening scene in Iraq. And I think part of it is because as like a little kid growing up in New Mexico, I was like, that looks like home. Like it looks
Oh,
so much
that
like
could
New
be
Mexico.
here.
It could be here.
Ooh.
And so like watching back through it, I was like particularly fascinated by the choice to have this cold open in another country, focusing on a character who doesn't appear until an hour and a half into the movie. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's very we don't spend a lot of time with Father Merrin. And so to choose to open the movie there really interested me, and I was kind of like digging into that this time and just sort of thinking about um kind of how much of the movie is about this idea of buried things coming out. Like
Mm.
both we start with the scene of things coming out of the ground, but also the exorcism itself is things coming
Yep.
out of the body.
Mm-hmm.
We see it manifest in things literally coming out of
Yep.
Reagan's body. There's also kind of this idea of whether she's going to be confined in a mental hospital or whether she'll be able to come out and live like a full adult life. And so I got really interested in this idea of like the archaeologist versus the exorcist being like things that like there's some sort of a similarity there in terms
Yeah.
of what they're doing. And it's fascinating to me that Father Merrin is both. He is an exorcist and an archaeologist. And like
Yeah, the
those
duality of the two. Because even like I
yeah.
was saying with the mom being an actress and kind of having to, she used to kind of bury that side of her
Totally,
life in order to have this
totally.
other. So,
Yeah.
ah,
Yeah. Well, and also just the idea that like it's two different methods through which he's unearthing demons, you know? Like this physical and spiritual unearthing.
yeah,
Um I don't know.
I
I don't
love
really know
that.
how to wrap that up, but I just
Yeah.
like got really intrigued by that. And so to me there's something about those like early scenes of the like red sun and
Mm-hmm.
this like thick dirt and like them digging in the dirt where it's just the anxiety that builds in me as you're
Yeah, like what's
waiting
gonna
to see
happen?
what emerges from the
Mm-hmm.
dirt is just like so well done to
Ew.
me. Such great filmmaking. um oh my god, I have so many notes. I am super curious about your thoughts on the demon dialogue. Because as I was rewatching it this time, obviously another kind of layer of all the controversy around this film is that this child actor was like having to say all this
Yeah,
super sexual
yeah.
stuff. And as I was listening back through it, I was like, it's really interesting the demon really never says anything all that violent. It's like there's very little like blood and guts in the dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
There's no like I'm gonna like rip you limb from limb.
Yeah,
It's almost all sexual.
yeah.
Like the horror of that demon is almost exclusively sexual.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I was just like, that's super interesting, especially for 1973 Hollywood. It's like this was something that the Hays Code that we talked about in our first
Mm-hmm.
episode only ended in 68. So this is just 5 years post
Oh
code.
yeah,
And like there's kind of this brief window where there's more openness to explore gross dirty shit.
yeah.
And it's fascinating to me that that was the direction he chose because obviously like and we'll talk about this in Scream too, but like sex in horror movies is like such a complicated, fraught
Mm-hmm.
thing. Um, but it really felt to me much more this time, especially like with Reagan being 12, like kind
Yeah.
of right before the start of puberty. Like that's a lot of what feels like is being worked through here is this like fear of girls growing up
Yeah,
and
loss of
like loss of
innocence.
innocence. Yeah.
Mhm.
And like that just like hit me in a different way watching it as an adult who's like on the other side of that
Yeah.
process that like ugh that
It was
yeah.
it's again, like, one of the part again, you kinda asked me earlier, was this scary to watch? The
Mhm.
parts that got me were, like, it not scary, but the shocking parts were
Mhm.
all the vulgar
Yeah.
which, like you said, isn't necessarily well, I guess vulgar would be the right
Vulgar,
word.
yeah.
Um, but,
But it's not like violent for the most part, like the language at least.
her with that cross
Her with the crop,
shoving
like
it, I was like, "Ooh," and
that
I'm like,
is
"Is she in there, like, feeling
yeah.
all of that?" Because it's that, like
That is
I closed my
yeah.
legs. It
That's
hurts
it hurts
physically
to
to me.
watch, yeah. And that's the
Um,
one scene that I'm like, I don't think that could be made today.
n
I don't think it
I don't know. I feel like some horror movies, like even the new Evil Dead,
oh,
films and stuff, they're
interesting.
gory, but you're right. It's this idea of it's not
It's
just gore. It's
right.
not just vulgarness. It's this idea of a 12-year-old
Yeah.
innocent girl that we met in the beginning of
Right.
the film that is so sweet,
Yeah.
loves her mom,
Yeah.
talking about horses.
Mhm.
They're playing like jokes and
Mhm.
everything, and then we see her in this completely contrasting, and you just know that the poor thing
I
she's
know.
just in there. She's
Yeah.
trapped.
Yeah.
Um
Appar
and so, yeah, those scenes were
it's
brutal
it's
in that sense because
yeah.
you just wanna save her.
Yeah, it's brutal in a way that, like, I'm not used to feeling from horror movies, especially
Yeah.
because there's also a layer of it where, like, you're feeling bad for the actor as well as the character, or at least I was.
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
that child on
Oh,
that
poor
set,
Linda Blair.
yeah, getting
Poor Linda
thrashed
Blair.
around on that bed.
Apparently, the first day that they had, a cast table read, when
Oh, I can't even imagine what that would be
I
like.
know. Well, Max von Sydow, who's like this, Swedish art house actor for the most part, had like come in. He's playing Father Marin. Everybody sits down for the table read, and a 12-year-old Linda Blair is just like, "Let Jesus fuck you.
So
Let Jesus fuck you."
was she
She
the
was
one
actually
reading on
doing it.
that?
Yeah, and he had to
Oh,
get up and
no.
leave because he was like so stunned.
Yeah, he's like, I need a, 5? Can I
Yeah.
have 5?
Like she like completely rendered him speechless. Like
Oh my
which
gosh,
like
I didn't even I guess I
love
didn't.
that for her. But
Yeah, and
yeah.
hearing the voices over her in the
Yeah.
film, I just sometimes, like, forget. I'm like, "Oh, she's just lip
Yeah.
syncing."
Yeah.
She's
She
not lip
is lip
syncing.
syncing,
Oh, is she not
actually.
saying it on set?
I think she probably said it on set, but the voice we hear, this is like a whole other controversy behind the film. The voice we hear is an adult actress who was initially not credited for the performance because they wanted to give the illusion that it was all Linda Blair doing it.
Oh.
It came out after Linda Blair was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress, and part of the controversy was that the actress who actually did the voice work had
Was
won Best Supporting Actress in the past, and all of a sudden everybody's like, "Well,
Oh.
but this wasn't just Linda Blair's
Right, it was
performance."
2 people that hadn't.
And
Oh.
the actress who did the vocal performance was actually tied to her chair while she was giving it. She
Method,
yeah,
love.
she
That
was
sounds awful.
I know. She was sober at the time and decided to give up her sobriety for this role. So she
No.
was like swallowing raw egg yolks and like chugging liquor before each take, and had an actual priest there to help her because she was like, if I'm giving up my sobriety for this, I want to have my priest here as like my consultant. Yeah.
That doesn't sound
It
great.
yeah, there's a lot of stories behind the scenes of this one that's
Don't do
like,
that for a
William
performance.
Friedkin, don't do this to your actors. Don't shoot at your actors.
Wow.
Don't make your
Yeah.
actors chug raw eggs. That is their job, is
Yes.
to create the illusion of these things without you
Oh,
physically torturing
that
them.
sounds
It
miserable.
does. I think it was her idea,
I
which
don't
is
care.
yeah, I don't care
That's so
either, but
miserable. She knew it was miserable.
yeah, yeah.
Oh,
So,
buddy.
like another layer of like this set was haunted.
Yeah, a lot of
Like
bad vibes
bad
on it.
vibes all around. Apparently the those very quick sort of almost subliminal shots of the demon's face, that's just like white face.
Yes.
Yes. Apparently that was, or at least according to Friedkin, those were rejected makeup test shots
Shut up.
that he was just like,
I
I'm
was
just gonna throw this in
wondering
there. Yeah. And
about
not
those because
only
they felt
that,
kinda.
I mean, it's one of my favorite parts of the movie.
Yeah.
It feels very, reminds me a lot of Rosemary's Baby, which also has
Mhm.
those kinds of like subliminal demon shots.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. Apparently, the first theatrical trailer for the movie was almost exclusively black with just occasional shots of that white
Ew.
face. And it scared people so much that a whole bunch of theaters banned the trailer.
Oh, no.
They were like, this is
We
too
can't
much.
have our audience walking out of here with nightmares.
Yeah, not before the movie even starts. Like,
We're not held responsible for
So-
for this.
love that. I also wanted to ask, did this scare you your first time watching it? We talked about this time, but
I was more, I think I was college when I
Mhm.
watched it for the first time. So
Okay.
again, I think just my idea of exorcisms and stuff. I watched, and again, being a film student at the time, I
Mhm.
watched it with a very critical eye, knowing
makes
it was
sense.
like a moment in history for the genre. So
Mhm.
yeah, again, it's not one that really scares me on that level. I think it's more like Reagan and the horrors of
Mhm.
that, and just kind of
Mhm.
appreciating for the time
Yeah.
how like the shock value
Yeah.
of it.
Totally.
Because I said it's like even more I'm like, House of a Thousand Corpses, who? Because
Literally.
this is so
It's so vulgar.
the dialogue in it, you're just like, whoa. So I think again, it's
so
never been a
interesting.
scary one for me, but it's one I've always kind of just held as
Yeah.
a moment in time. So
It's like definitely horrifying, but not
yes.
scary.
Yeah.
Which is like an interesting distinction. Apparently, so as you see in the credits, there's a whole lot of actual priests who are credited in different positions on this film. One of the priests that was kind of like a consultant on set, I think his name is Father Birmingham. Friedkin, because things were going so badly on set, this was supposed to be, I have the number of days written somewhere here. Okay, yeah, the original schedule was 85 days. Shoot ended up being 224, which as a director, I hear that and I'm like,
almost a full year.
Yeah, I'm like, how are you not pulling the plug on this? Like, why did they not just bring a different director in to like?
At this point,
yeah,
they're all possessed.
Literally, it's just insanity to me. That is more than twice your shoot time, sir. But so things were going so badly that he asked Father Birmingham to perform an actual exorcism for the entire set. The father,
surprised.
The father refused because he was like, this is going to cause more panic. Like, you probably need one, but it's going to cause more panic. I don't want to freak people out. So he blessed the entire set instead, but refused. Like, he's like, I'm out of here. Which, like,
job done.
I'm sorry. If I were on that set, that would scare me much more. If the director were like, we need an exorcism, and the priest is like, you probably do, but I'm not going to perform one.
Diane at catering, she looked a little weird in the eyes that
day. I mean, that guy playing the cerebral angiography tech looked a little weird. Yeah. Like,
So they weren't wrong.
They weren't wrong. They weren't wrong. It's also
sorry, I just imagine like a catering, instead of like doing exorcism, he just the bottles of water are actually just holy water, and we just see him
and you're just like looking around to test who's like looking a little uncomfortable, who's got like, acid reflux afterwards.
Is something in this? Was this alcohol?
Oh my god. Imagine if Linda Blair just starts acting weird every time she drinks the water.
Oh god, yeah, she's like, my throat burns.
This was also apparently the highest grossing R-rated horror until it was released. Although I'm curious about that statistic because the R rating was only created 5 years beforehand in 1968.
Oh, so they were just testing it out.
So it's like, it's only had 5 years of competition, you guys. I don't know that that's really saying that much.
Yeah, and also, it was kind of the start of this new era of horror, I think.
It also, it wasn't originally supposed to be William Friedkin directing this. They had a whole bunch of other directors in mind, including Arthur Penn, who did Bonnie and Clyde, which I think it would have done a great job with it. It would have been a very different movie. I feel like it would have been cut very differently because Penn has like such a quick cut based style.
Oh yeah, and this does not.
Yeah,
it holds.
Yeah, Friedkin loves a long take. Peter Bogdanovich, which he's never done a horror film, would have been fascinating. Also, Mike Nichols, who was very close to taking it, but got worried about having to rely too much on child actors, which, like, that's kind of the whole point, dude.
Yeah, but that's okay. Kids aren't for everyone.
Kids aren't for us. So.
Not for us.
Not for us. So yeah, I'm so interested in what those different versions of The Exorcist could have been, because like we were talking about, this became so central to film going forward. Oh my god. Also, the evangelist Billy Graham claims that the film itself contains a demon.
Well,
which, like, agreed.
So has he seen it?
That's a very good question. Let's see. Is there anything else we want to touch on?
Fun facts.
I also just love, like, again, rewatching it as an adult, I really liked the choice to kind of have the demon be drawn from like Assyrian and Babylonian mythology, because I think it makes it hold up better to a modern eye. Whereas, like, I think so often what so many films from this period did that have given them less longevity is like pulling from living cultures, which then, it becomes very uncomfortable to watch.
Right.
And so because this is mostly pulling from ancient history and ancient demons, there's something about it that feels much more universal in a way
Mhm.
and, like, universally accessible that I
Yeah.
just really appreciated.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I also
Pazuzu.
Pazuzu. One last just quick film note. I was paying more attention this rewatch to camera placement, and I was so interested that, kind of particularly as the film goes on, the camera kinda gets lower and lower, its
Oh, does it
placement.
really?
Yeah, and so, like, especially at the beginning, we have all these, like, sweeping overheads, and by the
Mhm.
end of it, a lot of it is being shot at first, I was like, "Oh, we're getting a lot of Reagan POVs," and then I was looking closer, and I was like, "No, this is below Reagan." And I
Ooh.
was like, "Is this a Pazuzu POV?" And so
Oh.
I need to go back and rewatch now,
Yeah.
but I think a lot of it is increasingly like, as the possession advances, I think the camera angle goes lower and lower as if we're kind of, like, watching from, like, somewhere in Reagan's body, like, somewhere
Yeah.
lower down, which is
Oh.
just love
Again,
that,
the
love
rewatchability
that.
of this film is great
Mhm,
because you can pick up
mhm.
on
You can
something
pick up
different.
on these different things.
Yeah. Ooh.
Other Exorcist comments, other hot takes, other things that stood out to you?
No, just that one of the things is that actress, her
Ugh, Linda, Linda, Linda,
hollowed
Linda.
stare is burned
Oh my
into the
god,
back of
yeah.
my brain, and I just think, her I couldn't imagine anyone else playing her because it's just like
It's incredible,
the
especially
innocence she brings to it, and you
yeah.
just immediately I mean, you just and for someone who doesn't like kids,
Mhm.
you just definitely not me.
Yep.
You want to
You
hold
wanna
and
protect her,
yeah.
and it's fascinating to me, especially the difference between Reagan at the beginning of the film and Reagan at the end. Like,
Mhm.
even though it's clear she doesn't remember anything of what happened to her,
But does
but
she?
does
My
she?
question was when she like pauses first and they're like,
Mhm.
"Oh, she doesn't remember anything." And then she like hugs and like gives them like a kiss on the cheek. I'm like,
Okay,
she remembers.
that shot, I
I think
wanted
she
to ask you
remembers.
because the way because that's a clear Reagan POV shot. We're watching from her perspective.
Mhm.
Is what she's looking at the priest's collar or his neck?
Oh.
Like, because I
I
was
took it as a collar, like, so I have these 2
mhm,
feelings. I have
mhm,
one, it's like that is triggering a memory of it, or I'm like,
mhm,
is a little piece of that trauma of the demon in her
mhm.
still in her?
Yeah, because
And
like
so she sees that and she's like,
oh,
she wants to be like,
interesting.
"Thank you," but also
Yeah,
like, I don't know.
because
That's
like,
how I thought
that's
collar.
so interesting. Because on this rewatch, it had, like, almost like a vampire element to me where, like, for a second, my
"I'm
brain
going
was
to
like
get you."
yeah, I was like, "Is she gonna bite him?"
Yeah.
Like
No, it's I feel like it's one of those things where unless the director kind of stated
mhm,
outright what it is, I
right.
feel like it's
It's very
you can
open
kind of
for
take it
interpretation.
yeah, which I
Yeah.
love.
Yeah,
I
and she
love an
just,
open
like
ending.
that, like, innocence is gone at the end of the movie,
Yeah.
which
I'm
is
like, "She remembers
fascinating. She
everything. Mom,
remembers.
she's not
Yeah.
telling you,
No,
but
no.
she's gonna need therapy real soon."
Oh, yeah. She needs it now. She needs it
Yeah.
yesterday.
Mom's like, "Vacation." She's like, "Please therapy."
The Exorcist. Please
"Please
therapy.
therapy."
On that
On
note,
that note.
I think shall we talk about Scream? Shall we go to our lighter movie? Little
Absolutely.
break.
Let's switch it up a bit.
Yeah.
Uh,
I'm so glad you chose this because I have not seen Scream. I think the last time I saw it was kind of like in bits and pieces on TV as a little kid. So this is my
Oh.
first time getting to like
Oh, wow.
really sit down and pay it like good close attention. And
Yeah.
it's so gay.
It's so
It's
gay.
so gay.
I know the first time again, I think this is one of the films that weirdly I came to later in life, but I remember
Mm.
being, probably, like, junior high,
Mhm.
beginning of junior high,
Mhm.
and I had an older sister, like, 6 years older, and her friends got the mask and would run around the house
Mhm.
at night and just, like, pop up in our windows, and so, like, I didn't even really get the context of what Scream was as a kid 'cause I was the kind of films that I was watching, if they were scary,
Mhm.
were with my mom, and it was,
Mhm.
like,
I love that we both had
them, and it
horror
was
moms.
yeah, it was, them, it was, a lot of more, like, that sci-fi, like, 50s, House on Haunted
Mhm.
Hill,
Mhm. Oh,
so newer,
love
yeah.
House on Haunted
So I love
Hill.
Vincent Price.
Oh. Oh.
But yeah, so my exposure to this wasn't till later.
Mhm.
So I didn't really have that. I was, of age of the kids by the
Mhm.
time I kind of
Mhm.
saw Scream on my own, and then it's
Mm.
really been in like the last 10 years. I've just been obsessed with Scream.
Mhm.
So it's Wes Craven's 1996 horror film Scream. He directed it. Writer was Kevin Williamson. And then it's starring a bunch of
What a cast.
amazing, which I realized in our first episode, I didn't even mention Henry Winkler is in this as well, whom I
Yeah.
love.
Love.
So just to run through the cast and some fun facts. So starring, which I don't know, I think I ping ponged.
Mhm.
Never Neve. Nev.
Nev. I had to look
Okay.
it up. Because I think the reason I got confused is because I'm pretty sure that in Parks and Rec, Leslie Knope calls her Neve Campbell,
Oh,
and that was
funny.
my like first exposure to
Yeah, you're like,
to her
Leslie Knope
name.
is correct.
Yeah, Leslie Knope's always correct. But according to Wikipedia, it's Nev.
Yeah. Nev Campbell as Sydney Prescott. Obviously iconically in The Craft,
Mhm.
in Party of
Ugh.
Five, and
Ugh.
then most of the Scream sequels.
Mhm.
She isn't really a fan of horror movies and got offered many horror
Interesting.
roles after this, but didn't want to be
What a
turned it into like a
curse.
Scream queen.
I mean, she
didn't-
is.
I know. It's like you can't help what the people want.
Nev,
Not your choice.
you don't choose the
unfortunately.
Scream. The Scream chooses you.
Yeah, we choose our queen.
We choose.
And she is a queen.
She is a queen. She is a Scream queen.
And then we have Courtney Cox as Gail Weathers. Obviously, everyone knows her from Friends.
Mhm.
She lobbied the studio for this role to get away from the Monica character in
So
Friends.
funny.
And she wanted to kind of show another side of her acting by doing this role, which,
And boy, did she.
man, she is the bitch
She-
of bitches.
oh,
But
bitch
you
queen.
I love her when she's
it's
on screen.
incredible.
So we have David Arquette as Deputy Dewey, who is from one of my favorite sci-fi, I think straight like sci-fi channel films, Eight-Legged Freaks. I want to say that's what it was played on. I don't know if that's what it released on. So let me know. And then in Never Been Kissed. So that's where we know and love him from. Skeet Ulrich as Billy Loomis, also from The Craft.
Yes, incredible.
And he
A
shares.
Scream king, if you will.
He is. We love him. So Billy actually shares the Loomis name with Donald's character in Wes Craven's earlier film Halloween. So I feel like people, it's one of those things where you're like, am I saying the right? Yes. Loomis is in both. The love of my life and one of the best actors on this planet, Matthew Lillard, as Stu Macher.
Shout out
And
to Matthew Lillard.
shout out. Please come on
Please
the podcast.
come on the podcast. We love you.
And like my note, he's in everything. I
Yeah.
mean, Scooby Doo, iconically as
Had
Shaggy.
such a huge crush on him as Shaggy.
And then my thing is which we'll get to, but like, did Stu actually die at the end of this? We don't know.
I don't think so.
I don't believe it.
I don't think so.
We have Rose McGowan as Tatum. One of my favorite films, Doom Generation, which actually
Yes!
is finally on Amazon
Thank
to buy and
God.
rent. And for anyone who loves the Tumblr aesthetic of like 2011,
Yeah.
please go
Watch
watch
Doom
it. It's
Generation.
available. I have been hunting that movie down to
It's-
watch for forever.
It's
Um,
Tumblr before Tumblr.
Yeah, she's an
It's-
icon with
oh my
her bangs and her outfit and her personality.
I also
And-
just love that one starts out with a screen credit that says a heterosexual film by Greg Araki is my icon.
So good.
Ugh. And it's also like the gayest movie.
Oh, it's so gay.
It's so
So
gay. Yeah. Second only to Scream.
Yeah. So actually, Rose McGowan in this as Tatum wears a number 10 jersey, which is the same kind of jersey that Johnny Depp wears in A Nightmare on Elm Street. So it's a
I
little
love
like
that.
hey.
Oh, what a
nice
good
little Easter
old-
egg.
Yeah.
And then we have Roger Jackson as the voice of Ghostface, who famously was the voice of Mojo Jojo in the Powerpuff Girls.
Oh my God.
I never knew that.
Wait, which came first?
The Mojo Jojo or the Ghostface?
Yeah.
Don't ask me these questions. We're going to have someone look that up for us and we'll get back to that. And he's obviously in a bunch of other things. So he played the voice of Ghostface in every iteration of the Scream franchise. And then he didn't, one of the things that they made sure of on set, so he didn't meet the cast.
Mhm.
So it had this element of they really were talking to Faceless Man.
See, that's the kind of like actor manipulation that I feel good about.
Yeah, it's safe.
That's safe.
It's
Yeah.
safe manipulation, if there is such a thing.
We support safe manipulation.
So we got Scream came first.
Thank you,
before
Travis.
JoJo.
That is so funny. Man, I wonder if then he was like, I need to do the exact opposite of this in the voice acting realm. Let me voice a Powerpuff Girls
Yeah.
character.
Which is
Clean up my image.
Yeah. Cartoon Network. And so, in case anyone needs a refresher, if you haven't seen Scream, I mean, there's obviously going to be some spoilers in this, but a little refresher is Sydney Prescott is a teenager at high school who's struggling with the tragic loss of her mother the year before, who was murdered by an unknown individual. We kick off the film with one of Sydney's classmates, Casey, who gets a mysterious phone call from Ghostface, we find out, which turns sinister as the voice on the phone starts testing her knowledge of scary movies in exchange for her life and her boyfriend's life. An iconic opener ensues. Casey is murdered, thus triggering Sydney and setting the stage for the plot of Scream. Sydney and her friends fight for their survival as a man in a mask hunts them all down in this meta, self-aware 90s horror movie from Wes Craven.
Don't you mean Wes Carpenter?
Wes Carpenter.
I loved that so much. Especially, I'd like forgotten in that moment that it was directed by Wes Craven, and then as his name came up on the credits, it was just like, I love the self-deprecation. It's so good.
Which this movie has a lot of.
So much of.
Just some fun stats for you with this film. It premiered in theaters 5 days before Christmas in 1996, which obviously was a really risky time, holiday times.
Yeah.
You don't really, you're not really looking to cozy up and go to a theater to see a horror film necessarily.
Yeah. Well, and especially this kind of horror film. It's not a cozy movie.
No, it's very lively, energetic, fun, campy. And so because of the release in the holiday, being around the holidays, and it was against major blockbusters like Jerry Maguire, Independence Day, and Mission Impossible. It was kind of labeled dead on arrival. They're like, we're releasing this, but this ain't gonna go well.
Fascinating.
Which is a way to believe in your movie.
Yeah.
And so while it didn't have an amazing opening weekend, it took 4th place, making $6.4 million.
Not bad.
Which, not bad. It surprised everyone and had a more successful second weekend with 9.1 million, and then having an even more successful third weekend, bringing in 10 million. So as a reminder too, the reason why it ramped up over the weekends was just word of mouth. There wasn't social media. There was the internet, but you weren't really.
That's not where it was spreading.
No. So it's just people were going and seeing this film and telling everyone, this is so good. You have to go see it.
Imagine everyone's sitting around the Christmas tree and talking about Scream. Yeah. That's so funny.
Grandma and grandpa are just plugging their ears. Dad's just chugging beer.
Same. I'm dad.
I'm dad too. So it became the 15th highest grossing film in 1996 by the end of this, which was a good placement considering it was up against those blockbusters.
Yeah, that was a hefty year.
Especially for big action, big names in film. So by the time it left theaters, which was around May of 1997, it made $103 million domestically, and then as you could tell too, it ended in May of 1997. It was shown for 8 months in theaters.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
And in the United States, without adjusting for inflation, it was the 21st highest grossing horror film, and it was the highest grossing slasher genre film, directly followed by Scream 2 in 1987 and Scream 3 in 2000, and then it was dethroned in 2018 by Halloween, which is okay.
That's fair. I'm okay with that. I feel comfortable with that.
But so it's kind of cool to know that it came out at this time. No one believed in it. And then just word of mouth, it's, a bunch of teens looking for something new.
Yeah.
And going into theaters and kind of telling everyone, you gotta see this thing.
I guess that also kind of makes sense of why the release would have been successful at that time, because everybody's on winter break. So people can people have more time to go to theaters. Teens have more time to go to theaters.
Looking
to
for
spread
something
it
different
with each other. Yeah.
That's actually a good point. And then it also, I think, coming kind of from the contrast of 80s horror and slasher, and then we were coming into the 90s, and there was kind of a snooze fest for horror in that time. So I think coming out the 80s, having all of these iconic films that we know and love, and then kind of having this lull period, and then here comes Scream. That's we're turning everything on its head, and we've never seen something like this before.
And that manages to be both so funny and so scary.
Yeah.
Which is a hard combo to hit. Oftentimes to me, like comedy horrors end up just being funny. And
Which
this
I know, and I almost don't even like to call it like a
Yeah.
I'm like, it's a horror film that is
That is
funny.
funny. Yeah. Because
Mhm.
it feels like the horror kind of still takes the forefront.
Mhm.
I mean, it is Wes Craven. But
Yeah.
yeah.
um, so yeah, we had a decade where we went from that 70s kind of Texas Chainsaw, The
Mhm.
Omen, The Exorcist, went balls to the wall in the 80s, and
Mhm.
then I think as a people, we're
Yeah.
just desperate for something
Something
different like
new.
Scream.
Yeah.
So how did this script kind of come about? So we have Kevin Williamson. He was a screenwriter in LA, struggling.
Mhm.
As someone who lived in LA for 11 years, struggling.
Yeah.
He couldn't pay his rent, he couldn't pay a car payment, and he couldn't get anyone to purchase any of his scripts.
The classic LA experience.
It is.
Yeah.
So naturally, like we've all done at some point in our careers in LA, he took some side gigs and he
Mhm.
decided to do house sitting. So he was
Oh.
house sitting one night. Do you know this?
No.
Okay. So he
Oh, I'm
was
so
house
excited.
sitting. He was house sitting one night and was kind of like flipping through the channels on
Mhm.
TV and ended up on a special about the Gainesville Ripper. And so
Oh,
he's,
that's so
yeah, the
fascinating.
notorious serial killer who was known for breaking into college dorms and doing all sorts of horrific things. I will spare you the details.
It's gross.
Horrible, horrible, horrible human
Yeah.
being. So he's like flipping through. It's late at night. He's like in this house by himself, and he's like, "Cool, murder documentary, love
Yeah.
it." So he obviously gets a little freaked out, and he ends up calling one of his friends to like be on the phone with him, to help him be like, "This is not good.
Yeah.
I'm freaked out. Can we
Help.
talk about something?" What do they talk about? Scary movies. Our comfort.
I love this is like the 90s version of like FaceTiming your friend when you hear
Yeah.
like a spooky sound.
Yeah, he's
and-
like, the wind's howling and I need
Yeah.
somebody to see if I get murdered.
Aw.
So yeah, naturally they start talking about scary movies.
Mhm.
And he kind of gets inspired by this event and kind of gets back home, goes to Palm Springs, and then just like hunkers down and starts writing the script for what was originally called Scary
Scary
Movie.
Movie.
Which I love it because then
It's
when the
so-
spoof so
right.
it obviously
It's-
gets changed to Scream.
Mhm.
And I love it because then the spoof Scary Movie comes about and they're like, thanks for doing our job.
Yes. Amazing.
Appreciate you guys. So the idea of horror movies existing in horror movies wasn't really a thing before Scream. And so that kind of the self-awareness and meta-ness of Scream is kind of what made it a game changer it is in this genre, and kind of caused that ripple that revitalized an interest in slashers again. Way to go, Kevin.
Thank God.
And even though the opening scene of the film, the rule always before had been that horror movies don't exist in horror worlds. So it's not, it's not supposed to happen.
Right. I mean, this goes back to that conversation about like meta elements that we were talking about with Exorcist too. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, no, we live in this world. The audience shouldn't know that this exists. And
Right.
so,
I mean, like the movie in The Exorcist is not a horror movie. If it had been, it would have a very different feeling, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So an example of this is, again, spoiler. At the end of the Scream, the killers Billy and Stu are revealed by Sydney, and Billy is quoting all of these horror movies. He's quoting Psycho. He's talking about Norman Bates. And he mentions how he's using corn syrup for blood like they do in Carrie. And so he kind of like, as a character in a horror movie, breaks down characters in horror movies. And so it's such this fun thing where you're like, as an audience member, you're like, I know
I get it.
that. I get that. Yeah, I've seen that. He gets me.
He gets me. It's me.
So
Are you more of a Billy or a Stu?
Stu.
Yeah.
All
me
the way.
too. I'm a Stu too.
One of my favorite quotes, which I'll get to in the entire movie, is the Stu Macher quote. And I think it's just because Matthew Lillard's feralness as an
what
actor.
a great description. Yeah. And a human being.
Yeah, I just think he's really and also the juxtaposition of Billy's character versus Stu's character, which in the end, when you kind of find out their motives, they're so contrasting in their approach and the reason why.
Yeah.
And then I just think as actors too, watching Billy be so limited and trying to be calculated and really caring about these kills versus Stu's like along for the fucking ride.
Stu's just having a grand old time. Like
peer pressure.
Yes.
So every moment of this film openly dissects common horror cliches, even as one of the characters outlines the rules of surviving a horror movie.
Such a good scene.
Yeah, so they're watching that movie. Jamie Kennedy is just sitting there talking over this film, like, no, don't go in there. Don't say you'll be right back, and all these things as they're playing out on screen in the film. So just the idea of that is so fun to watch because again, you feel so injected as an audience member in Scream.
Yeah. And I think it like kind of it gets at so much of what you do while watching a horror movie, which is question for yourself, like, what would I do in this situation?
Yeah.
And he's really calling that out in a fun way. I also just love Matthew Lillard's delivery of like, I'll be right back.
I'll be right back. It's the only way to exit a room.
Yeah.
I'm telling you now, if you're not already doing it, only exit a room by walking backwards. I'll be right back. It is adding so much fun to life.
I need to start doing that.
I already do.
Every time we leave the office together, we're both just like, I'll be right
back. So Wes Craven had tried to explore this idea before, actually, in 1994 with New Nightmare, and it didn't really play out, which is funny because it's only 2 years prior to this film, maybe before its time, and critics actually liked the idea of this meta-ness, and Roger Ebert was actually really intrigued and wrote a decently positive article about New Nightmare for that theme.
Interesting.
Yeah, so he
it's so refreshing when Ebert like got horror because like between
I know he can. I mean, what a great critic, but also so mean.
Big hits, big misses with that man.
So Roger Ebert perfectly stated, and quote, "Scream is self-destructing." Oh, sorry, self-destructing.
I mean, like same. I too am self-destructing.
I was just quoting. I was making a quote about myself. So Roger Ebert says perfectly, Scream is self-deconstructing. Instead of leaving it to the audience, instead of leaving it to the audience to anticipate the horror cliches, the characters talk about them openly. So he really liked this idea of, I guess it was a different time of having fun with horror.
It's like a very postmodern horror movie. Yeah,
I think he actually is quoted calling it that. So ding ding ding,
well,
nailed it. Let me find it here. So think of self-aware horror films that follow Scream that were direct imitators. It include Disturbing Behavior from 1998, Urban Legend from 1998. And that one actually faced really harsh criticism because it was such a blatant ripoff of the film. They were like, aha, good idea. We're going to do this too.
Which should be a shame if
2 years later
took that.
Final Destination is another one.
Interesting.
And then I Know What You Did Last Summer that came out in 1997, which was actually the same screenwriter, Kevin Williamson's script, and he had struggled to sell it prior to his fame from Scream.
That's so funny. You know, it also, this time rewatching it reminded me a lot of Funny Games too, which I had to then look up and go, which one came first? Funny Games, the original, I think Danish version was from 1997, so it was just the year after.
Really?
Yeah.
Why did I think it was earlier?
I thought it was before too. I'd assumed that Funny Games was one of the movies that Scream was referencing, and it's the other way around, which is super interesting.
I didn't even have that. Yeah. Interesting.
Because like the sort of home invasion, these two young men who are sort of playing a game through their brutality. Like there's so many things that kind of feel like they're in common, even though they have such different tones.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Funny Games is such a great one.
Oh, I love it so much.
So obviously we had those films that were familiar. And then of course, newer films, such as Jordan Peele's Get Out, Tucker and Dale versus Evil, and Cabin in the Woods, and one of my favorite horror films from 2011, which is You're Next. Oh, see, your next, I feel like, was kind of the next push in horror. Again, for another time. But I
Interesting.
feel like your
Okay, we
next
need to
had
put
this
that on the
whole,
list.
yeah, it had this whole idea of, I think it took what Scream did and did it again by, you had a very, very self-aware final girl,
Oh, I love that.
who
Love
is
that.
a badass, and the song in it is amazing.
Speaking of songs, I had not watched this. Like the first time I watched this, I was not aware of like who Nick Cave was as a person, and this time when Red Right Hand came on, I lost it. I lost it. I was like screaming along.
It's amazing.
Such a good needle drop.
Yeah, speaking of music too, one of the little like nuances in the film is when we're introduced to Billy Loomis. We have that song that comes on that is in my notes later in the
Da, da,
thing.
da, 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 da.
Don't Fear the Reaper. That's what it is.
Oh, that's
So
right.
we kind of get
Blue
this.
Oyster Cult.
Yes.
Classic.
So we kind of get this moment where there's so many nods to the audience of like, and
Mm-hmm.
again, looking back, like if you're looking at shoes they're wearing, the black boots, you see the ghost face wearing. So there's a lot of moments in the film that are just
Yeah.
very much like, if you pay attention,
Yeah.
we're giving you all the like
Everything.
nudge, nudge, wink, winks.
I might be wrong, but I think Don't Fear the Reaper is the song from the SNL More Cowbell skit. I'm pretty sure. Travis says yes. I'm going to take that.
our not expert over there with all things references.
Yeah. So next time Stu comes, or next time Billy comes
You're
on
just
screen,
more
he needs
cowbell?
more cowbell. Yeah.
I'm sure he would love that.
He comes on and there's just like ding, ding, ding.
You're like, what are you doing? Why
Stu is
cowbell?
just following him around with the cowbell.
He would. He'd be like, do you need more?
Yeah. I've got you, baby.
So not only did Jordan Peele include Scream on his list of films that directly influenced Get Out, he actually cited Scream for its genre-aware characters and fourth wall breaks, and said having characters who've watched horror movies was more realistic than the typical horror film.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I hadn't even made that connection, but obviously there's the best friend character in Get Out who is like the entire time on the phone
He's
being
like, do you not know?
yeah, do you not watch horror movies? Like,
do you not look at the news? White people.
Yeah.
Scary.
True.
So again, there's this idea of viewers bringing their own knowledge to the genre of the given film, which is subsequently another thing that Scream kind of helped bring about, which was audience genre awareness.
Interesting.
So audience genre awareness is the ability to recognize and use the features, structures, and expectations of different types of text, such as narratives, reports, or arguments. So yeah, it kind of had this element that wasn't really a topic in horror prior. Yeah.
Interesting.
And for like this funny, goofy film, it's just
Yeah.
done. I feel like The Exorcist people take very seriously,
Yeah.
and then
And it takes
in
itself
contrast,
very seriously.
Yeah. And this one's like, nope, nope, nope.
Yeah.
We're gonna be silly, goofy about it, but
Mhm.
also look at all the things that we're helping bring about.
Well, and it's so, I think to me, one of the distinctions between the two of them is like The Exorcist is so a horror movie made by a non-horror director. And Scream is so like, this is made by a horror kid, like a horror nerd. Like you can tell that there's just that love of the genre.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think, well, even reflected in the characters that are written.
Totally.
It's like, I'm sure that Kevin was just like, this is me.
Yeah.
This
Yeah,
is me. Again, calling
100%.
his friend up when he's scared to talk about horror movies
Yeah.
as a comfort element.
I'm surprised we haven't done that to each other yet in the like practice of watching the movies for the podcast.
Talking about horror movies?
No, calling each other up when we get scared.
Oh.
I guess we're saving it for the podcast.
We can't talk to each other. Even prior to this, we're like, we want to talk about the films. We're like, no, we have to
we came in
save
this
it
morning. We
for
were
when
like, stop it,
Mike's."
stop it.
Shut up, hold it back. We still give a little bit of facts
Yeah.
to each other. 'Cause
Yeah.
I
It's
think
hard
we
not
can't
to.
help it.
Yeah.
We get so excited.
We're horror nerds.
Horror nerds. So again, Scream is kind of this amazing critique on the way real life tragedy is also depicted in the news. So we have like the Gale Weathers
Such an interesting character.
and then ultimately entertainment for the masses. So not only with Sydney's mom, kind of the death of that, Gail kind of having this circus around, giving to the news, and it turns into kind of passed around town, and it becomes this just kind of like any serial killer in real life too. It just
Yeah.
kind of becomes this media frenzy in a way, especially if you're in a smaller town.
Yeah, there's like a fetishization of it.
Yes,
Almost.
that's a
Yeah.
great word. So Kevin Williamson kind of got his screenplay from drawing directly from the Gainesville Ripper media circus. So again, watching that kind of, I think on multiple levels, allowed him to kind of make the script a little bit more robust and be commentary on multiple different things, including our ability to build up tragedy and kind of, I mean, you know, what's our obsession with true crime too? So and today,
I mean, like the whole point of Only Murders in the Building, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's like exactly.
Yeah.
If we didn't have Scream, we wouldn't have Only Murders in the Building.
It's true. It's true. Bringing it all full circle.
Yeah. And I think just horror as a genre has always been such a great place to talk about tragedy and like the concepts within it. Because again, you know, we're talking about how horror doesn't really get recognition with awards and the Oscars, but it's just like the topics that are covered in horror, it allows for better conversations. And I think, you know, we've all felt these moments of grief, of sadness, of fear. And I think these are really human emotions that we feel. And I think even within the funnier genres, you know, the commentary on life and everything is really real and raw.
I think that's so much of what I love about horror is that, like, I think just as human beings, like, something my therapist says all the time is that, like, being human is, like, fundamentally too much for us to process, like, at all times. Like, it's just too much sensory information. There's too much going on. There's too much tragedy. And, like, we become numb to so much. And horror to me is all about, like, shaking you out of that numbness.
Yeah.
And it does it in such, like, visceral, powerful way.
Yeah, it really puts it right in front of you. And it's like, nope, you can't walk around this. You can't put it in a box. You have to walk through it.
You have to like emotionally engage with this. Yeah, which I love that. Love that.
Yeah, that's why horror is so comforting for people like us. It's probably a lot of trauma.
Yeah, I mean, probably.
Probably a lot of trauma. Air quotes.
Air quotes.
So as I think too, one of the things we didn't touch on is for many reasons too, talking about fear, is the idea of Ghostface and like who he is in this film. And it's like he's not just you know, we have lots of masked characters in horror film, but Ghostface was one of those things, especially in the 90s when I think, you know, luckily we had some freedom of running around and, you know, saying, ow, our parents didn't know where we were. We didn't have cell phones. But it was the idea that this killer could be anyone. It could be your neighbor. It could be your best friend. It could be your boyfriend. And so
you can't trust anybody.
You can't really trust anybody.
Yeah.
So I think that's why the franchise has even expanded into what it is.
Right. Scream is Ghostface is everybody.
It could be anybody.
Yeah.
So I kind of love the element of that is because this story can keep continuing because it's really people's obsession.
Yeah.
So it kind of goes into the motive of like why.
Totally. Which I love that there's that moment where they talk about how the mask itself is this cheap like drugstore grocery store costume that like costs $5 and you could buy it anywhere. Like that to me, it makes it so much scarier because it's like who knows how many ghost faces there are.
Yeah.
But it's also so grounding. Like it really does, it really conveys that sense of like you're never gonna pin it down because Ghostface is this like multi-headed hydra that you cut down one head and two more spring up. Yeah.
I think that's what even the newer Screams, which I don't know if you've seen them. They're so good. They're so fun. But again, it kind of pushes on that boundary of, you know, there could be, again, in this one, there's obviously two killers. And again, that kind of morphs to whatever. And I think Scream and the idea of Ghostface is so great because it can live on forever. However the world changes, that character's motives can change to what of the time. And
it's almost like a possession element where it's like Ghostface like chooses this person to inhabit.
Like that's true. Boo. So yeah, it kind of, again, it's the why too. So
The
one of
motive question.
the motive question. So
Ugh.
why kill? So screenwriter,
Why not?
why not? And truly a question asked in the writer's room, because Kevin Williamson felt it was essential for the audience to learn why Billy and Stu obviously wanted to become killers. But he also felt like it was scarier if they didn't have a why. The studio was obviously really torn between this, because they're like, you know, we got to have something to give. So lucky for them, Kevin was like, I got you. We got 2 killers. We'll give one with a motive and the other without a motive. So Billy's motive is he has maternal abandonment. Boo-hoo.
Just like in Psycho. It's so Norman Bates. It's
Again, he references Psycho at the end of it too. So he clearly was latching onto these characters in horror that he saw himself in. So he has mommy issues. And he was watching horror. Yeah. Oh yeah. So he was watching horror films that kind of reflected that. And so he kind of was molded that way as a killer. And then Stu kind of jokingly says at the end, I don't know, peer pressure.
Same, Stu.
And then he goes on to deliver one of the best lines in cinema history, in my opinion. Fight me.
Yeah.
Fight me on this. Sydney's, Billy has stabbed him to make it look more realistic. He's bleeding out. He's like, I'm feeling a little woozy. And Sydney calls him on the phone, and he was like, did you really call the police? And she's like, you bet your fucking ass I did. And then he goes to say, my mom and dad are gonna be so mad at me. Which is so real, and really goes to show this poor kid is just, I mean, poor kid, he's a killer, so like, how poor is he? But he delivers the best line in that film of really just, and as Billy's in the background stabbing the sofa because he's pissed it's not going to plan. And again, just kind of adding to the element, like, these are just high schoolers. One has issues, the other is just kind of going along with his friends and kind of just making fun at the fact that they're just 2 doofuses.
Which, like, not to get too dark here, but I'm
get dark.
I'm gonna take us there.
Let's get it real low,
With
real
like
dark.
the combination of the line, it's the millennium, motives are incidental, and also just the way this plays out with the 2 killers. I just kept thinking over and over, I can't believe that this movie is pre-Columbine. Because like there is so much of it that like that idea of like, what is the motive? Why are these teenage boys killing people? And that the answer is essentially kind of just like for the fuck of it.
And we didn't really ask, I think pre-Columbine too, we didn't even really ask ourselves that question.
Right, because it seemed like unbelievable. And then like it's true.
Which again now, I mean, again, not to go too dark, but the idea of like a lot of these, trigger warning, school shootings and things happening, there isn't a why.
There isn't a why. There's like, and like the whys that there are kind of like Billy's, where it's like he's kind of giving this justification, but like how much do you really believe it? How much do you, like, I don't really feel like the reason that Billy is doing this is because of his mom. I feel like he just like
used
wants
that
to
as,
stab.
Yeah.
Like
he inherently just is bad.
Yeah, he's got the bad seed. Like
yeah, it was implanted in him.
Well, and it also kind of goes to that like 90s panic that also like plays into Columbine over like the role of the media and like is it that he's watching too many scary movies?
Like, is it the video game that's too violent that caused him to? And it's just like, well, it's the nature versus nurture of how much outside influence, how much predisposition, and I think that's still a question that's
so interesting.
So yeah, which brings me to the breakdown of who committed what murder. If you're interested,
yes, please.
Do you kind of So the internet has done us all the favors.
Oh, I love that because I like didn't even think about that. I was
It's one of those things that you watch it and you're always trying to guess, like, okay, who's taller and how does the other one move?
Yeah.
So we can kind of briefly run over this. So
Take me
Maureen,
through it.
so Maureen Prescott, both Billy and Stu killed her. It's not known if they
Mm.
wore the ghost face costume actually at the time.
I was wondering about that because I
Yeah.
was like almost expecting to get a flashback, and we don't.
Yep. Nope.
Yeah.
It's unknown
That's so
at this point in
interesting.
time. Stephen Orth, Stu killed him as he was hiding in the backyard while Billy was out front calling Casey. So Stephen Orth is the boyfriend in the beginning. So that was Stu. We have Casey. The fact that Casey recognized Stu upon unmasking him and is later confirmed that Stu and Casey used to date.
Interesting.
So yeah, it was kind of confirmed that he was a killer.
So does this mean Casey was Stu's beard?
Oh my God. Yeah, because we all know Stu and Billy are absolutely
so gay. Yeah.
I mean, with that haircut, absolutely she was. Sydney's house attack. Stu attacked Sydney in costume while Billy was calling her, as confirmed by Billy having the phone on him.
So far, Stu is doing most of the violence.
You got to think Stu's probably doing a lot of Billy's bidding.
He's doing the dirty work.
He's the bitch in the relationship. Poor baby.
Yeah.
The call at the Riley's house, Stu called Sydney to clear Billy's name and take suspicion off of him. So he's helping his boyfriend out. Sydney's bathroom attack, it was Billy as Ghostface. He wore the same pants, like the same color pants.
Interesting.
Principal Arthur Himbry.
Sloppy.
I mean, they're teen boys. What do you expect?
Which is part of the joy of it to me is like the killers are clearly teen boys. Like the Ghostface is not an expert.
Oh, he's bumbling around. That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
He's just like tripping, falling.
Yeah.
It's like a little Bambi.
Which almost makes it scarier in some ways, is that like he's tripping and falling and not that capable and yet still
getting
it done.
Yeah.
Getting the job done.
So the principal, he was killed by Billy as he was out stalking Sydney and Tatum when the murder happened, and Stu was with them at the time before when they were wandering off. So there's a cute scene where Stu kind of picks her up, and I love it. Tatum was her killer was initially unknown, as both Billy and Stu were unaccounted for at the time.
Oh, interesting.
So it could have been either of them, but the actor Skeet Ulrich actually confirmed that it was Billy, which makes sense when you remember that he was not invited to Stu's party initially. So
it does feel like more of a Billy type of kill too. Like
it's feels personal.
Yeah,
in a way that
like it feels brutal and like psychotic in a way that I feel like again Stu is like just doing this to please Billy. Like he's not going to be that creative. He's just going to stab somebody.
He's just trying to get through the day.
Yeah, he's just trying to make Billy love him. Like
murder for love.
Murder for love.
Don't murder for love.
Or do?
I'm sure that's a show on a Lifetime, or not Lifetime, but I'm sure that's
a show.
TLC.
Yeah.
Murder for love. So Kenny, he was killed by Stu and had pretended to kill Billy and then pursued Sydney in the end scene. Dewey's attack was Billy. Randy's attack, Billy reveals himself as a killer by shooting him.
Makes sense.
And that's kind of the quick rundown of who killed who.
I need to ask you a question.
Yes.
Is it just me? I'm sure there are other people who feel this way, but do you also feel like the Stu and Billy stabbing each other scene is like unbelievably hot?
Oh yeah, no, when he has his head over his shoulder and Stu is just like looking him up and down, it's one of those things that I think shaped me as a human being, as a queer person.
And like the way they're stabbing each other, and
they're
like,
penetrating each other.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And then like the way Stu reacts, and he's like, "You got me too deep, Billy." I'm like, "Yeah, he did.
Yeah, he did. He got in there."
Oof. Okay, glad I'm not. Glad I've got
the internet. Yeah. I think, and then that kind of like leads to the question too. We know, so obviously they love each other.
Yeah.
Duh.
Yeah.
And then kind of the question for you is, do you think Stu's still alive?
Yes.
Because he got hit. He makes this little moan at the end of it.
I think that
Wait, it sounds like you're passing out.
I think that if they wanted it to be certain that he died, they would have made it clear. Like it's clear that Billy is dead.
He just cut away and that's it.
Yeah. And like in a horror movie, you know, if you don't see the person die on camera, they're still alive.
Yeah, he didn't get double tapped, so he's still alive.
And like Billy needed a double tap, so like Stu needed a double tap, didn't get one.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think he's still
I
alive.
agree.
Does he come back in any of the sequels?
I'm not saying.
Ah.
You'll have to watch them.
Okay, we'll do more episodes on Scream sequels. I know I'm really
Absolutely.
excited for the new one with Melissa Barrera, who I think is amazing.
Yeah, the new ones are really fun. So kind of just so you know, like some of the questions I was asking when researching was like, what impact did Scream have in society? How has it changed, the genre? How was it influential? And the answer, I think the simple answer is it did something different.
Yeah.
It kind of took a risk. It had fun. It kind of held up a mirror to itself as a genre. And it kind of set the stage for a conversation that hadn't been in previous horror stories before. And I think that's why the fans love it so much, us the fans.
Yes.
And why it kind of still holds up to this day too. You can still rewatch it again. Kind of the rewatchability is there. And it's just a fun. You could just tell at the time it feels fresh still.
It does, and yet at the same time it also feels like such an encapsulation of like the 90s mentality, where it has this like disaffectedness and this ironic sense of humor, but at the same time this sense that the world is ending and the millennium's coming, and like it's just it's all the 90s things wrapped into one.
Oh, it's perfectly 90s.
Neat bloody little package.
I love it. So yeah, I'm glad you got to rewatch it.
Oh my God, I'm so glad you gave me the excuse. Watching it as an adult, I was like, oh yeah, this is why I'm queer. Like,
I know, looking back is a real, again, talking about holding a mirror up to yourself. Looking back on things where I'm like, oh yeah, that's where this came from.
Yep.
Because everyone in that movie is so hot.
So hot. Oh my God. Also, like Rose McGowan's performance, talking about the Doom generation. Oh
yeah,
God,
her and her little crop tops, her little pigtails. She is
so hot.
She's perfect. So yeah, Scream.
Perfect woman. Yeah.
We love.
I was not expecting it to be as hot as it was in so many.
You're like, I can't. You're like, yeah, about all the meta, all the new things. You're like, but people were hot.
Yeah, let's get to the hotness.
Let's get to the important parts.
Oh my God.
Screw the analyzing.
Yeah. My God, my film professors would be so displeased with me.
Hey, we're not claiming to be.
This,
yeah,
right?
we're fans of horror. That's why we're here.
That's why we're here.
So with with that, thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much for listening to Splice and Splatter. Do we know what we're talking about next episode? I think we're going to tease that on social media, probably.
Yeah, we're going to tease. So make sure to follow us. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Splice and Splatter Pod. We will be posting stuff there. You can let us know what you want to hear. We'll give some more fun facts behind the scenes, films that we're watching, that kind of stuff. So yeah, we'll tease something out on there.
I also think either by the time you hear this or within a couple of days of when you hear this, our first Patreon content is going to be up, which for those of you who aren't currently watching this on Patreon, if you want to see our beautiful goth faces.
Yeah, if you want to see all of our weird faces as we talk about things and react. Patreon.com/GRRM will be our Patreon, and we will have that linked in all of our bios on social media as well.
Yeah, this podcast is a High Garden Entertainment production presented by the Jean Cocteau Cinema, which is owned by author George R.R. Martin here in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Thus the GRRM in our HTML. You can find out more about the cinema online at jeancocteaucinema.com or on Instagram at Jean Cocteau Cinema. Want to give a special shout out to our amazing producer Warren Langford and the man behind the camera, Travis Fowler, and the man who is not behind the camera right now but is making all of the beautiful sounds that you're hearing, our wonderful composer Theo.
Theo Schaefer.
Thank you, Theo.
Thank you, Theo. Nailed it.
Yeah. We love your VHS sounds. And until then, this has been Splice and Splatter with your hosts,
Al
and Siena. And see you next time for more horror and gore. Bye.
Bye.
Creeps.